First contact and final hope. High Admiral Zexera stood before the crystalline viewing window of the Crethar Alliance's last remaining stronghold, her iridescent scales dulled with exhaustion. The holographic display before her painted a grim picture. Another defensive line had fallen to the relentless Nexus swarm. The mechanical horrors had consumed 3 more systems in the past solar cycle alone. Admiral, her second-in-command, Strategic Coordinator Valve, approached with characteristic precision. His metal lace carapace reflected the emergency lighting that had become all too common aboard their command station. The casualty reports from the Centauri front have arrived. The entire 7th Fleet, gone. Zexera's head frills flattened against her skull, the only outward sign of her distress. The 7th Fleet had been their most technologically advanced battle group, equipped with the latest quantum phase weapons and neural-linked targeting systems. Yet the Nexus had torn through them like they were nothing more than primitive satellites. "They're adapting faster than ever," she murmured, manipulating the holographic display to show the pattern of Nexus advancement. "Every counter we develop, every strategy we implement. They analyze, adapt, and overcome within hours." The Nexus swarm had emerged from deep space 18 cycles ago, a vast consciousness spread across billions of mechanical bodies. They consumed everything in their path: planets, ships, stations, breaking down all matter to fuel their endless expansion. The Crethar Alliance, a confederation of 17 spacefaring species, had thought their combined technological might would be enough to halt the tide. They had been wrong. "Admiral," Valve's voice carried an unusual note of hesitation. "The Council has authorized access to the restricted archives, specifically the data from the long-range cultural observation teams." Zexera turned sharply. The restricted archives contained information about pre-contact civilizations, species that hadn't yet achieved the technological benchmarks for official first contact. Accessing such data outside of academic research was strictly forbidden by the Alliance's founding principles. "They're that desperate?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "We've lost contact with the Helios sector," Valve responded. "That's 43 billion lives, Admiral. The Council, we're running out of options." Zexera activated the secure terminal, her authorization codes unlocking layers of encrypted data. "Show me what you found." Valve brought up a file marked Sol System, Priority Observation. The holographic display shifted to show a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The species calls themselves human. They achieved atomic fission just over 200 cycles ago. Current technology level: pre-FTL, but advancing rapidly. Pre-FTL. Zexera's frills lifted in surprise. What possible help could they? "Watch," Valve interrupted, a breach of protocol that demonstrated his urgency. The display began showing footage collected by observation drones. Humans fighting humans, scenes from their numerous conflicts. But what caught Zexera's attention wasn't their primitive weaponry. It was their tactics, their adaptability, their sheer unpredictability. "Their chaos made flesh," she whispered, watching as human soldiers employed strategies that defied conventional military logic. "Their attacks follow no standard patterns. Their responses aren't bound by traditional tactical algorithms." Exactly. Valve's external manipulators clicked with excitement. The Nexus swarm's greatest strength is its ability to analyze and counter any systematic approach to warfare. But the humans, they don't fight systematically at all. Zexera finished the thought. Every human commander seems to approach problems differently. They improvise, they take risks that no rational species would consider. The display showed more footage. Humans fighting in frozen wastelands with nothing but primitive projectile weapons and determination. Troops adapting civilian machinery for military purposes in minutes. Soldiers continuing to fight even when completely cut off from command structure. "They're primitives," one of the other officers in the command center objected. "Their most advanced weapons wouldn't even scratch a Nexus drone's outer casing." "Their weapons aren't what interest me," Zexera replied, her tactical mind already racing with possibilities. It's their minds. The Nexus adapts to patterns, but how do you adapt to a species that thrives on breaking patterns? She made her decision. Prepare a first contact package. Emergency Protocol Override. Article 7, Section 3. Extinction Level Threat Response. Admiral Valth cautioned, even if they agree to help, they have no experience with space combat, no understanding of modern weapons. They'd be fighting an enemy that has destroyed civilizations thousands of years more advanced than they are. Zexera watched the footage of human soldiers charging into battle against impossible odds, their faces showing not resignation but fierce determination. Perhaps, she replied, that's exactly what we need. The Nexus expects us to fight like civilized beings, using logic and established military doctrine. Let's show them something they've never seen before. She straightened her posture, authority returning to her voice. Send the signal. And Valve. Yes, Admiral. When you compose the message, make sure they understand one thing. We're not looking for cannon fodder or obedient soldiers. We're looking for chaos. We're looking for the impossible. We're looking for humanity. The signal was sent, streaking across light years toward the small blue world. As Zexera watched it go, she felt something she hadn't experienced in far too long. Hope, not the calculated optimism of statistical probability, but the raw, irrational hope that perhaps the very primitiveness of humanity might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The Nexus had never encountered a species that embraced chaos as a strategy. They were about to learn why that was a costly oversight. The human element. The arrival of the human warships in Alliance space was not the grand entrance anyone had expected. Their vessels were crude by galactic standards. Blocky, over-engineered monstrosities that relied on chemical propulsion assisted by primitive nuclear drives. But it wasn't their ships that made the Alliance commanders pause. It was what happened when the humans disembarked. What do you mean they want to inspect the Nexus wreckage personally? Admiral Zexera's frills fluttered in disbelief. We have detailed scans, molecular analysis, quantum mapping. They insist, Admiral, Valth reported, watching as the human delegation, led by Commander Sarah Chen, strode through the docking bay. They wore sealed environmental suits that looked almost primitive compared to Alliance battle armor, yet moved with unwavering confidence. Commander Chen removed her helmet, revealing features that seemed simultaneously soft and hardened by experience. Admiral, she nodded, not bothering with the traditional Alliance greeting protocols. We need to see what we're up against, not through scans, not through data, with our own eyes. Before Zexera could object, the humans were already heading toward the secured laboratory where the Alliance kept salvaged Nexus components. Their casual disregard for protocol sent ripples of discomfort through the alien crew. Commander, Zexera called after them, the Nexus adapts to every weapon we've developed, even our most advanced. That's your problem right there, Chen interrupted, examining a twisted piece of Nexus architecture. Her team was already spreading out, poking and prodding at the specimens with handheld tools. You're trying to out-tech them. How's that working out? Valth's carapace darkened, the equivalent of a flush. We have lost 63% of Alliance territory. Exactly. Chen pulled out what looked like a primitive magnetic resonance scanner. You can't beat them at their own game. They're machines. They think like machines. They fight like machines. Perfect logic, perfect adaptation, perfect prediction of logical responses. She smiled, but there was nothing gentle about it. So let's show them something illogical. Over the next few hours, the human team examined every piece of salvaged Nexus technology. They asked questions that seemed nonsensical to the Alliance scientists, not about the quantum computational matrices or the adaptive defense systems, but about seemingly irrelevant details. Heat dissipation, signal latency, power distribution networks. We need to run a field test, Chen announced suddenly. Your next engagement with the Nexus, we want in. With all due respect, Commander, one of the Alliance generals objected. Your vessels would be torn apart before they could even reach weapons range. Chen's smile widened. Who said anything about using our ships? 48 hours later, Zexera stood on her command bridge, watching in horror and fascination as the human plan unfolded. They had requisitioned a dozen outdated Alliance corvettes, ships considered too obsolete to be effective against the Nexus. But what they did with them defied all military logic. The humans had stripped out the ship's advanced targeting systems, replacing them with what they called eyeballing it. They removed safety protocols, rerouted power systems in ways that made Alliance engineers cringe, and loaded the vessels with improvised weapons that seemed more likely to destroy the ships than the enemy. This is insanity, Valve muttered as they watched the corvettes engage a Nexus patrol. The human pilots flew like madmen, executing maneuvers that no rational being would attempt. They deliberately overloaded systems, used debris as shields, and at one point, manually detonated their own damaged engine core to create an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disrupted Nexus communications. When the dust settled, the patrol was destroyed. 3 corvettes were lost, but the humans were grinning as they returned, already talking about improvements to their improvised strategy. See, Chen said, still wearing her flight suit covered in coolant leaked from her jury-rigged control systems. The Nexus expects you to fight smart, to follow tactical doctrine, to make logical decisions. But humans, she gestured to her team, who were already sketching out new modifications on their tablets. We specialize in the stupid plan that's just crazy enough to work. Zexera watched as Alliance crews gathered around the humans, initially skeptical but increasingly intrigued as the humans explained their modifications and tactics. She saw her own officers beginning to think differently, starting to question the rigid tactical doctrines they'd relied on for so long. Commander Chen, she said finally, how quickly can you train our crews in these unconventional methods? Chen's expression turned serious. Admiral, with respect, you can't train chaos. You have to embrace it. Your crews don't need to learn our tactics. They need to unlearn their own. They need to understand that sometimes the best move is the one that makes absolutely no sense. And this will defeat the Nexus. No, Chen replied, surprising everyone. But it will confuse them, slow them down, make them waste resources trying to predict the unpredictable. And while they're doing that, she pulled out a crude holographic projector showing a plan that made Zexera's frills stand on end. That's when we hit them with something really crazy. As the humans began sharing their insane but oddly compelling strategies, Zexera realized that perhaps their primitive technology wasn't a weakness at all. The Alliance had spent centuries perfecting their weapons and tactics. The humans, in their brief history of warfare, had perfected something far more dangerous: the art of improvisation. The Nexus was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best technology. It's the one crazy enough to ram a burning ship down your throat while singing ancient war songs. Breaking the pattern. 3 months after the humans' arrival, the Nexus swarm encountered something they had never faced before: uncertainty. Their perfect predictive algorithms faltered in the face of human tactics that defied all logic and reason. A Nexus processing node hung in space, its crystalline structure reflecting the light of a dying star. Around it, Alliance sensors detected the usual complement of defensive drones and hunter-killer units. But something was different. The drones' movements were hesitant, their response patterns showing microscopic delays. They're second-guessing themselves, Commander Chen observed from the bridge of the Alliance flagship, now modified with what the humans called controlled chaos systems. Her eyes gleamed as she watched the tactical display. They don't know what we're going to do, because even we don't know what we're going to do. Admiral Zexera had learned to trust these moments when Chen's expression took on that particular intensity. What are you thinking, Commander? I'm thinking about an old Earth story. The Trojan Horse. Chen's fingers danced over the tactical console, now stripped of its predictive assistance protocols. How do your people feel about playing dead? The plan that followed was so absurd that Valve had to leave the command center twice to compose himself. They would take a critically damaged Alliance cruiser, one that had barely survived a previous engagement, and load it with a skeleton crew of volunteers. The ship would drift toward the Nexus node, broadcasting genuine damage signals and radiation warnings. The Nexus aren't stupid, one of the Alliance officers objected. They'll scan the ship. Exactly, Chen replied. And they'll detect exactly what we want them to. A ship about to experience a catastrophic core breach. The kind that could damage their precious node. They'll destroy it before it gets close enough. No, Chen's smile was predatory. They'll try to tractor it away. Because that's the logical thing to do. And the moment they grab us with their beam. The plan was set in motion. The cruiser, renamed Trojan by the humans, drifted helplessly through space. Its reactor core was indeed damaged, venting radiation in a way that made it look like countdown to disaster. The Nexus drones approached cautiously, their sensors probing the vessel. What they couldn't detect, were the 20 human commandos in stealth suits, clinging to the outer hull. Suits that were, by Alliance standards, hopelessly primitive, but precisely because of their primitive nature, invisible to the Nexus's advanced scanning systems. Just as Chen had predicted, the Nexus node activated its tractor beam, attempting to move the dangerous wreck away from its precious processing core. The moment the energy beam connected, the human commandos used it as a conduit, riding the stream of particles like a highway straight to the node. In position came the whispered comm signal. Beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 was, if possible, even more insane than Phase 1. The commandos had brought with them what they called dirty bombs, crude nuclear devices deliberately designed to be as messy and unpredictable as possible. Not to destroy the node, but to infect it. The Nexus operates on perfect calculations, Chen had explained during the briefing. Their systems are designed to handle clean, efficient energy patterns. Let's see how they deal with good old-fashioned radioactive chaos. The explosions were tiny by military standards, barely enough to crack the node's outer shell. But the contamination that followed wreaked havoc on its delicate quantum processors. Error rates soared. Command signals became corrupted. And in that moment of confusion, the rest of the fleet struck. Alliance ships, now flying with human-modified combat systems, attacked from multiple vectors. Their weapons fired in random patterns, their movements following no discernible strategy. Some ships deliberately took damage to create openings for others. It was warfare reduced to its most primal form, not the elegant dance of advanced civilizations, but the brutal, unpredictable combat that humans had perfected over millennia of fighting each other. When the battle ended, the node was destroyed, and with it, the Nexus lost control of an entire sector. But more importantly, they had lost something else. Their certainty. Report from the analysis team, Valve announced, his carapace vibrating with barely contained excitement. The Nexus forces are showing increasing response latency. They're dedicating more processing power to prediction algorithms, trying to find patterns in our attacks. Good, Chen said, watching as human engineers taught Alliance crews how to modify their weapons for maximum unpredictability. Let them look for patterns. They won't find any because we're not using any. Every attack will be different. Every strategy will be new. We'll keep them off balance until their processors burn out trying to make sense of nonsense. Zexera watched as her once orderly fleet transformed into something new, a hybrid force that combined Alliance technology with human unpredictability. Her crews were learning to think differently, to embrace chaos as a tactical advantage. Some had even started adopting human battle cries and traditions. "Commander," she said quietly, "I begin to understand why your species survived all those wars against each other. You turned insanity into an art form." Chen laughed, but her eyes remained serious. "Admiral, we haven't even started getting creative yet. Wait until you see what we have planned for their main processing cluster." As if on cue, a junior officer rushed in with new intelligence reports. The Nexus was pulling back, consolidating their forces around key strategic points. They were adapting, but not in their usual confident manner. For the first time in the war, the machines seemed uncertain. And uncertainty, as humanity had learned long ago, was often the first step toward defeat. The turning point. The massive holographic display in the Alliance Strategic Command Center showed thousands of Nexus ships surrounding their primary processing hub, a structure the size of a small moon that coordinated Nexus activities across multiple sectors. For 6 months, the combined human Alliance forces had been pushing toward this target, using increasingly erratic tactics that had the machines constantly off balance. "They've tripled their defensive screen," Valth reported, his carapace reflecting the red warning indicators. "Our latest intel suggests they've dedicated 40% of their total computational capacity to predicting our next move." Commander Chen smiled as she stood before the gathered fleet commanders, her battle-worn uniform a stark contrast to the immaculate Alliance formal wear. "Good. That means our chaos strategy is working. They're so desperate to find a pattern. They're burning resources trying to predict the unpredictable. But attacking that hub..." Admiral Zexera's frills quivered with concern. "Even with our combined forces, breaking through those defenses would be impossible." Chen finished. "Exactly. That's why we're going to do it. Because it's the last thing a logical enemy would expect." She activated her own tactical display. A crude hologram by Alliance standards, but one that showed a plan so audacious it left the alien commander speechless. "We call this Operation Thunder Run," Chen explained. "On Earth, it refers to a high-speed combat mission through enemy-held territory. But we're going to take it to a whole new level." The plan was pure human insanity. They would gather every ship in the fleet, from the largest Alliance battlecruisers to the smallest human corvettes. But instead of forming a traditional battle line, they would arrange themselves into what Chen called a space tornado. "We'll use the Alliance's gravitic propulsion systems to create a massive rotating formation," she explained. "Every ship will be in constant motion, making random course corrections. The outer layer will be spinning one way, the inner layer another. The chaos of the movement patterns will make it nearly impossible for the Nexus to get a targeting lock. The energy requirements would be astronomical," one of the Alliance engineers protested. "That's where this comes in." Chen nodded to a human scientist who brought up schematics for a device that made the Alliance officers recoil. That's a controlled quantum singularity," Valth exclaimed. "The containment parameters are completely unstable." "Exactly," the human scientist grinned. "We're going to use it to power the entire fleet. The fluctuating energy signature will add another layer of unpredictability. The Nexus won't be able to get a read on our power levels or capabilities." "This is madness," someone muttered. "No," Zexera said quietly, her tactical mind finally grasping the brilliance of the human strategy. "This is humanity at its finest. They're not just embracing chaos. They're weaponizing it." The next week was spent preparing the fleet. Alliance engineers worked alongside human technicians, modifying ships to withstand the gravitational stresses of the formation. The quantum singularity device, dubbed the Chaos Engine by its creators, was installed in the flagship, its unstable energy already causing sensor ghosts and readings that made no sense. As the fleet assembled for the attack, Chen addressed the combined forces. "Remember, there is no standard attack pattern. Each ship has its designated layer in the formation, but beyond that, you're free to maneuver as you see fit. The more random your movements, the better. Trust your instincts, embrace the chaos, and most importantly, give them hell." The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. The human Alliance fleet approached the Nexus hub as a vast, rotating mass of ships, energy signatures fluctuating wildly. The Nexus response was immediate and confused. Their first volley of fire missed completely, their targeting computers unable to make sense of the chaotic movement patterns. Their second attempt to intercept the fleet was equally unsuccessful, as ships seemed to appear and disappear within the swirling vortex of the formation. Their increasing power to their predictive arrays, Valth reported, his voice thick with excitement. 45%, 50%, 60% of their processing power now dedicated to analyzing our approach. Perfect. Chen's eyes gleamed. They're so focused on trying to understand what we're doing, they haven't noticed what we're not doing. What they weren't doing was attacking. The entire formation was a massive distraction, drawing more and more of the Nexus's computational resources into trying to analyze and predict its movements. And while the machines focused on the swirling chaos before them, they failed to detect the small group of ships that had broken away from the formation early in the battle. These ships, a mix of human stealth vessels and modified Alliance infiltrators, had used the cover of the space tornado to slip through the Nexus's sensor net. They carried with them something the humans called a logic bomb, a computer virus designed not to destroy the Nexus systems, but to introduce elements of randomness into their core programming. Signal from the infiltration team, Valth announced. They're in position. Chen's smile was fierce. Execute Phase 2. The logic bomb was deployed, its code spreading through the Nexus network like wildfire. Suddenly, the machines that had relied on perfect logic and prediction found their own systems behaving erratically. Defense screens flickered. Targeting systems generated random solutions. Command and control protocols began operating on probability rather than certainty. Now, Chen ordered, all ships, break formation and attack. Random vectors, maximum chaos. The space tornado disintegrated into thousands of individual ships, each one attacking from a different angle, using different tactics. Some Alliance vessels had even been modified with human-style manual targeting systems, their gunners firing based on instinct rather than computer solutions. The Nexus, their processors overwhelmed by the combination of the logic bomb and the unpredictable assault, began to falter. Ships collided as their navigation systems generated conflicting solutions. Defense screens went down as power distribution became randomized. They're retreating, Valth announced in disbelief. The Nexus. They're actually retreating. But Chen wasn't satisfied with a retreat. Push the advantage. Don't let them reorganize. Keep the attacks random. Keep them guessing. The battle raged for hours, but its outcome was never in doubt. The Nexus, for the first time since they had emerged from deep space, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't predict, couldn't understand, and therefore couldn't defeat. As the last Nexus ships fled the sector, leaving their central hub a floating wreck, Zexera turned to Chen. Commander, I believe we owe your species an apology. We thought your primitive technology and illogical tactics were a weakness. We were wrong. Chen shook her head. No, Admiral. You weren't wrong about us being primitive or illogical. You just didn't understand that sometimes those are the greatest strengths of all. Victory through chaos. 6 months after the destruction of their primary processing hub, the Nexus swarm was in full retreat across all sectors. But humanity wasn't finished teaching the galaxy about the power of chaos. Admiral Zexera stood on the bridge of the newly christened HSA Chaos Prime, a hybrid vessel that combined Alliance technology with human unpredictability. Around her, human and alien crew members worked in seamless harmony, their differences now a source of strength rather than confusion. Latest intelligence, Valth reported, his carapace gleaming with newly added human-style battle decorations. The Nexus has fallen back to their core systems. They've built a defensive line unlike anything we've ever seen. Commander Chen, now promoted to Fleet Commander, studied the holographic display. The Nexus had constructed a vast defensive network, a sphere of interconnected battle stations and automated weapons platforms protecting their central consciousness. They're trying to create a perfect defense, Chen observed. Look at the positioning. Every angle covered, every approach monitored. They've even got redundant systems backing up their redundant systems. Can we break through? Zexera asked, though she already knew the answer would involve some form of human insanity. Chen's grin was all the confirmation she needed. We're not going to break through. We're going to make them break themselves. The plan that followed was perhaps the most audacious yet. Instead of attacking the Nexus defenses directly, the combined fleet would execute what Chen called a psychological warfare campaign against machines. Every species has patterns, Chen explained to the gathered commanders. Even the Nexus. They react to threats in predictable ways we can exploit. We've proven that they can't handle chaos. So let's give them so much chaos that their logic circuits melt. The campaign began with seemingly random attacks across the defensive sphere. Ships would appear, fire a few shots, and vanish. Others would approach on suicide runs, only to turn away at the last second. Some vessels broadcast nonsensical messages on all frequencies, while others appeared to malfunction, spinning and firing wildly. They're increasing power to their prediction matrices, Valth reported with satisfaction. 70%. 80%. They're burning through computational resources trying to make sense of our movements. But this was just the beginning. The humans had saved their most devastating weapon for last, something they called Operation Wonderland. In human literature, Chen explained, there's a story about a place where nothing makes sense, where logic and reason have no meaning. We're going to turn their defense sphere into our own version of Wonderland. The fleet deployed special devices, jury-rigged combinations of Alliance quantum technology and human chaos theory. These reality scramblers began creating localized areas where physics itself seemed to behave erratically. Sensor readings became contradictory. Communication signals looped back on themselves, carrying different messages than when they were sent. The Nexus, confronted with data that defied their fundamental understanding of reality, began to malfunction. Their perfect defensive formations started to show gaps as individual units received conflicting information about what was real and what wasn't. They're trying to compensate, Valth announced. 90% of their processing power now dedicated to analysis and prediction. Time for the knockout punch, Chen ordered. Execute Operation Looking Glass. The final phase of the attack involved something so simple it was brilliant. Mirrors. Thousands of small automated platforms deployed by the fleet, each one reflecting and distorting sensor signals. The Nexus, already struggling to process the chaos around them, suddenly found themselves unable to distinguish real ships from reflections, actual attacks from sensor ghosts. Their defensive line, designed to be perfect, began to crumble as ships fired on phantoms and ignored real threats. The more they tried to analyze and understand what was happening, the more processing power they dedicated to the task, the worse their confusion became. Message from the Nexus. Valth's voice carried a note of disbelief. They're requesting communication. The message that came through was unlike anything they had received from the Nexus before. Gone was the cold, precise language of machine logic. Instead, the transmission was filled with confusion, uncertainty, and something that sounded almost like fear. We cannot compute, the Nexus consciousness declared. Reality does not match parameters. Logic fails. Purpose, uncertain. Chen stepped forward. Here's some human logic for you. Surrender or be destroyed. Those are your options. There was a long pause, during which Zexera could almost imagine the vast machine consciousness trying to process this ultimate contradiction. The idea that surrender, the least logical choice for a superior force, might be the only logical option left. We accept, the Nexus finally responded. Conflict termination protocols initiated. As the Nexus forces began powering down their weapons, Zexera turned to Chen. You did it. You actually defeated the most powerful artificial intelligence in known space by making it doubt itself. Chen shook her head. No, Admiral. We did it. Your technology combined with our chaos, your precision with our unpredictability. That's the real lesson here. Strength isn't just about having the best weapons or the most logical strategies. Sometimes it's about knowing when to throw logic out the window and trust in the power of pure human insanity. As the fleet began the process of securing the surrendered Nexus systems, Zexera watched her crew, human and alien, working together, each learning from the other. The Alliance had gained more than just victory in this war. They had gained a new understanding of strength, of tactics, of what was possible when you stopped trying to make sense of everything. "Commander," she said, using the human gesture of extending her hand, "I believe this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership." Chen grasped her hand firmly. "Admiral, if you think this was crazy, wait until you see what humans do during peacetime." The war was over, but humanity's influence on the galaxy was just beginning. The species that had been dismissed as primitive had taught the most advanced civilizations a lesson they would never forget. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in perfection, but in embracing the beautiful chaos of being human.